Good afternoon. My name is Arlene Vassell. I'm the Vice President of Programs, Prevention, and Social Change at the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to this webinar session entitled Keeping Your Cup Full, Responding to Vicarious Trauma. By joining today's session, you have taken an important step in prioritizing self-care, and we want to applaud you for that. We are so fortunate to have Vanessa Timmons joining us today as our trainer. Vanessa is an awesome advocate, trainer, colleague, and friend. Vanessa is also the Executive Director of the Oregon Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, has been a writer, activist, and women's health advocate for over 25 years. She has attended Marylhurst University Multidisciplinary Studies program in Portland and has continued her formal education through certificates and training, including the Interpersonal Neurobiology of Trauma certification program at Portland State University. Vanessa has served as the Director of Programs at Raphael House of Portland, a Northwest Regional Field Organizer for the National Organization for Women, and the Domestic Violence Program Coordinator for the Multnomah County Domestic Violence Coordination Office. In addition to serving Oregon Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence in the past as the Women of Color Program Coordinator and the Board Chair. In addition to her duties as the Executive Director, Vanessa currently serves on the Board of Directors for the National Network to End Domestic Violence. Vanessa, thank you so much for joining us today. You now have the floor.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, and to everyone on the call. I'm really excited to present this material to you all. Let's see. So I want to start by just kind of going over what we're going to cover today. We're going to be talking about vicarious trauma, and we're going to be talking a lot about the impact of vicarious trauma on advocates, specifically kind of those of us who do the work on a day-to-day basis. What does it mean to be affected by trauma, and how do we navigate that? So this is going to be a really practical discussion in a lot of ways. We're going to explore some of the self-care practices that are really helpful for us as individuals, as well as explore some of those things that can be supportive in our organizations. And then at the end, we're going to talk about some ongoing resources and handouts that are going to be given to you in the follow-up email that you're going to be receiving. So I also want to just invite you, as we're talking about self-care, it's really important to attach the information to your current life. So I really want to invite you. I know this is a webinar. We're not in the room together, which is really the ideal way to talk about self-care. But given that we're not in the room together, I just want to invite you to go ahead and participate as much as you can and let us know what you're thinking. If you have a question, just pop up with it. I know that folks from who are hosting the webinar are going to be watching for your comments and your questions, and we can really do that in real time. So I want to make sure that this is a good use of your time, that you get your questions answered, that you share what you're struggling with, share what your strengths are and any kind of self-care that you're doing that you think is just amazing and it's going really well. But I want to make this as interactive as possible. I want to start with, this is a quote that I really enjoy, and I think the reason I like this quote is because it really kind of started my path towards self-care. The first thing that got me thinking about self-care and really, my responsibility to take good care of myself was this idea of, is this really essential? Why should I, as a domestic violence advocate, an activist, a leader, a mom, a wife, a daughter, a mother, why should I be caring about self-care with all of the other things that I have to do? Is self-care selfish? Is it meaningful? Is it important? Why should I do it? As advocates, why is it part of our training on an ongoing basis? What are some of those reasons that really motivate us to think about taking good care of ourselves? And so as I was thinking about this, I came across this quote, and it really answered it for me. And this is, we are dying. We are social activists on the front lines, transforming the world with a backpack full of fear, guilt, shame, loneliness, resentment, and anger that is killing us. And what this speaks to is the unverbalized impact of trauma. As we're sitting with those that we are working with, and we're in our organizations, we're doing accompaniment with rape survivors, or we're running support group, or we're on the hotline, or we're in transitional housing units, or even as directors or supervisors. We're in the trenches with people, and often we don't give voice or attention to the inner world that we're experiencing. And so this quote really spoke to that inner world, and really speaks to why we think about self-care. Self-care is an opportunity, a moment for us to think about what's happening inside. How am I being impacted by this work? Am I listening to my own needs? And so I like to share that. I'd love to hear if this resonates with anybody out there listening. So how do you define trauma? What would you say if somebody was coming to you, a young new advocate, and said, what is this vicarious trauma stuff? What is that? What are some of the things you can just throw out? What are some of the words that you would use around trauma? How would you define it? And I'm looking to see if there's any. Some of the ways people have defined it in the past are saying things like pain, or numbness, or frustration. I see people fear and passing on through our spirits a bad experience. I'm seeing some of these responses coming through, and some of the ways that people are explaining trauma. And the universal kind of way that people talk about trauma is usually just about this fear. I like to think about trauma in terms of constriction, right? If we think about it in terms of energetics, there's expansion and constriction, and trauma is that pulling in, that constriction. Yeah, being overwhelmed, experiencing something out of our reality, internalizing clients' traumatic experiences, frustrated, bound, hopeless. These are all the things that tell us that we are experiencing trauma. Yep. Exhaustion being the norm. Thanks, Amber. I'm reading that overwhelming exhaustion being the norm. Exactly. Those are some of the things. And so the definition of vicarious trauma that as we explore this more deeply, there's a couple of things that are really key to trauma, and that is this process of change, this idea that our worldview, our experiences with ourselves, with our bodies, with the world around us starts to change. It says here the process of change that happens because you care about other people who have been hurt and feel committed or responsible to them. So the very thing that makes us good advocates, that engagement, that connection, can be part of what can happen and create trauma. And we're going to learn ways to prevent that, but it is part of what sets vicarious trauma up. The other piece is over time, this process can lead to changes in your biology, your physicality, your spiritual well-being. And so this change that happens over time. And for most people, they don't always realize that this change is happening, because it can happen very slowly over time, that you're sitting with people, you're working with people, you're dealing with the stressors of the day. And over time, months, years, many years, it starts to create a transformation. So vicarious trauma is the change that happens over time that transforms us as we sit with others in their healing or in their suffering. So I like this definition of vicarious trauma because it allows me to kind of see the core elements, to watch for in my own life. how is my worldview changing? How is the things that I love, am I still doing them? Or when was the last time I really tended? Has it been 6 months? Has it been 2 years? I've worked with advocates who haven't taken, tended to their own well-being for years because they're so busy tending to the well-being of others. And how has this work transformed you? Right? One of the things that I remember probably about a year and a half ago, I was working at one of my member programs, and I was working with the new advocates. And I'm here in Portland, Oregon, and so we have this really vigorous biking community and oceans and beautiful mountains to play in, and we're very, there's a lot of outdoor activities, and so we have these young advocates, and they're riding their bikes, and they've got their beautiful water bottles, and they're talking about going hiking and fishing and all the things they're going to do, and they're just so energetic, and coming back about, I'd say maybe 6-7 months later, and these advocates were so different. They're not riding their bike anymore to work. The water bottle's been replaced with a giant coffee cup or a bag of French fries, and there's just this idea, this really visual experience of watching how how this work can transform somebody over time. And so I kind of had this conversation with them about that, and we laughed about it and put things in place to support them, but it was really a stark realization for me. So what advocates have shared with me about the vicarious trauma, and I think that there's a real reluctance, I think, on behalf of advocates to really talk about this. We want to be strong. We want to be there for the folks, the survivors that we're working with. We want to be there for our families. And so sometimes it's really hard for us to really talk about how the work might be affecting us. But what we know from talking to survivors is that it does affect, and there is a sense of hypervigilance or physical illness and sometimes addictions, a disengagement from the work. I talked to an advocate I was working with self-care, and she said the way she realized that she was really in need of taking better care of herself is that she had started closing her door more often, or really avoiding phone calls, not checking her voicemail, not checking her email. There was this disengagement or avoidance from the work. And I know that Laura Vanderbilt Lipsky, who talks about this sense of changing the world view. She talks about going hiking in Seattle and being out in the woods with her family and looking out in this beautiful wilderness setting that was just breathtaking. And she was thinking, boy, this would be a place where someone could really bury a body because of the isolation. And she realized her world view had shifted from a place of beauty to a place of violence. So these are extreme cases, but it's important for us to think about as advocates and to even ask yourself, how have I changed over time doing this work? And so, just if you have pencil or paper handy, as you're sitting there listening to the webinar, take a minute to just jot down a word or a phrase, or even make a mental note to yourself, just how have you changed doing this work? Have there been impacts to you? And if so, how has your worldview changed? If you come into the work with a sense of hopefulness, I'm going to change this world, and, is that still present for you? And if so, wonderful. And if not, what can we do to reclaim that? So what the research tells us about vicarious trauma is that it impacts a caregiver's or an advocate's. I'm going to use they use the word caregiver in the study. I'm going to use the word advocate, but it impacts the ability of advocates to actually do their work. So this isn't just something that we do for others. There is the research does say that our ability to do our work well and to stay engaged, and engagement is the core of advocacy. So the core of our work is being engaged with others, being engaged with people. So this ability is impacted by vicarious trauma in a very real way that the research has pointed to. We also know that it's affecting our organizations. It's affecting our field because of these high rates of turnover. So it affects, as advocates, these are careers that we are in this field because we want to be. This is an important work that we trained for years to be part of. And so just realizing that not being able to continue to do the work as long as we may want to, that's a pretty significant impact. But we also know the good news is that research overwhelmingly shows that self-care changes trauma. It changes the impact of trauma because our resiliency, that filling the cup up, really prevents, it can act as an inoculation. It can prevent a lot of the impacts of trauma, and it definitely is going to allow us to recover from the trauma more quickly. The other thing that comes out of the research is Bonnie Bondinuch, one of my teachers here in Portland, Oregon, talks a lot about, she's wrote a book called The Brain Savvy Therapist. And through her research and through her practice, she learned that because so much of people's trauma happens in community, a lot of times our trauma triggers will happen in community, in relationship. So while we're doing the work, some of our own trauma can come up in that process. And she sees that as an opportunity to heal old wounds. So one of her favorite phrases is, "We are wounded in community and we heal in community." So that's an important piece of research. And that really speaks to us, myself included, who are survivor advocates. That we're advocates, but we're also survivors. And so realizing that a lot of our stuff shows up for healing as we're doing this work, which is a wonderful opportunity to heal more deeply. The other thing that is just fascinating to me around this idea of trauma is that we are really in a different time. So we're taking in the equivalent of 174 newspaper articles and information every single day. That's 5 times what it was in 1986. And so it's really important to realize that we are living in a more complex time. We are busy. We are taking in tons of information. A lot of the information is dire. We hear many really troubling news reports and stories. And so just realizing that complexity is part of what you're dealing with when you're thinking about your self-care. And so I think what I take from all of this kind of research is just that idea that, the trauma, the complexity is real, but through community and through my own good self-care, I can really be healed and have a vigorous, joyful work life. One of the really hard things about this conversation around self-care is that it's not self-care. We talk a lot about self-care. It's like, oh, we need to take good care of ourselves, and there's a lot of conversation around it, but there's not a lot of conversation around our suffering or what is difficult or where we're struggling. And so I just invite you to think about, what do you notice? Just like in your real work, what do you notice in your office? What do you notice in your own relationships? What do you notice in your coworkers? How is trauma directly affecting you personally right now? And so I just invite you again to just make a mental note of that or jot it down, but give voice, give space to the experience of trauma that you're currently having. Not you can post it, but you can also just make a note of it for your own personal self, because keeping the trauma experiences kind of on the down low, I would say, gives them greater power. Yeah. And I see that Maria's writing that I'm more irritable, not too much communication, no patience for coworkers. Absolutely, very valid. For myself, I noticed that it's harder for me to do things after work. I just can go home and just feel like, oh, I don't want to do one more thing, when Normally, I'm a very energetic person. Not taking breaks, trouble sleeping, another very common one. Absolutely. So we're empowered by our ability to look something in the face and not carry shame or secrecy around it, but to say this is just life as people. This is what we deal with. Susan writes, one point is that if we have to think about our own self-care is that we have to face our own issues. Exactly. Many times it is very painful to do when we don't like to face our own demons. Exactly. But I have really learned in my 53 years and doing this work for over 30 is that the things that we face often become our greatest strengths. When the things that we thought were those terrible weaknesses become our greatest strengths when we face them. So thank you all. So this is what we know, that when we're under this kind of profound stress that we've talked about, that there are really specific things that happen in the brain, and there's really specific things that happen in the body. And so it's important for us to have patience and compassion around these kinds of things. Some of the things that can come up is all or nothing thinking. So this is this idea that it's either this way or that way, and we really do see this in the polarization of our nation. This idea that everything has to be my way or this way. It's good or it's bad. And the reality is that most things are nuanced and complex, and very few things are going to be either one way or the other. Most things are going to be both this and that. And so that kind of either-or thinking is one of the ways that stress shows up, and you can see that profoundly right now in our nation. Overgeneralizing, emotional reasoning, which is just a way of saying that our limbic system is running the show. It's not something where emotions aren't a negative thing, but if all that is reasoning or helping us to make a decision about this thing or that thing is our anger, our frustration, our challenge, our emotional life, then we're not able to bring to bear our higher level functioning, our discernment, our creativity, our confidence or our trust. So the emotional reasoning means just not bringing to bear those higher level functions. The focusing on the negative when under stress, and there's lots of research to tell us this, is that we have a negative ideation. We'll have more, we're more likely to only see the negative things. It's a way of our brains and our bodies trying to figure out what's wrong, and so it'll really give us that focus on what's negative. Minimizing things that we should give more attention to. So these are just some of the distortions or some of the ways that stress shows up. One of the things that I think, if you look on the right hand of your slide, there's some ways to bring to bear that cognitive part of the brain that will help you navigate some of these stress reactions. And the first one is just one of my favorites, and that is when you feel under stress and you're having a lot of difficulty, just asking yourself, is this a helpful way to be responding to what I'm facing right now? It's just a simple question to say to yourself, is this the most helpful way for me to be responding to the stress today? And sometimes it's all you can do, and I think that's wonderful. And other times you might say, no, actually it would be better if I took a walk, or it might be better if I turned the news off and had a cup of tea and called a friend. Or maybe it would be better if I just went in and sat down and talked to my supervisor and asked for help. And so there's just different, that question can create all kinds, it just creates that spaciousness for you to be proactive instead of reactive. Another one is just to think about, do these thoughts contain thinking strategies? Is this way of thinking actually creating solution? Or is it just, am I spiraling? Am I just spiraling here? And so these are just some of the things. You're going to get this PowerPoint, so I won't go into each and every one of them. But these questions that promote cognitive restructuring are just self-care questions, and you may have your own too. I think thinking of the ones that will support you, but it's a way of stopping and supporting your spaciousness to make better decisions. One of my other favorites is how did I learn to think this way? Sometimes these old scripts show up when we're most vulnerable to them, when the stress is most intense. These old scripts, oh, you're not good enough, or you shouldn't have done that, or you shouldn't have trusted that person. These old stories show up. So it's sometimes really helpful just to say, where did that come from? When was the first time I felt like I wasn't good enough? Who taught me that? Where did I learn that? And challenge it a little bit. So given all that we've learned and all that we know about self-care, what are some of the reasons we don't do it? You know, what do you think? What are some of the reasons you don't do some of the things that you know will benefit you? What gets in your way? Yeah, Millie writes, I'm tired. Yeah, time takes time, sometimes feeling guilty. Absolutely, absolutely. Self-control, time having enough. It looks like time is coming up a lot for people. Deserving, that willingness, feeling like you deserved a break, the overwhelm, like you don't want self-care to become one more thing that we're not good at or that we're failing at. Not wanting to admit that we can't handle stress, right? And not making yourself a priority. Absolutely. Yeah. These are all cultural norms. Women can do it all. We're superhumans, Alicia writes, and very, very common. This idea that, I'm going to be all things to all people. And that can be a real barrier, not realizing that, we give from a place of abundance, right? When you give from a place of lack, it can create a lot of resentment. But when we give from a place of being full, so full that we're spilling over with joy into our community, spilling over with energy and a sense of confidence and creativity, then our whole communities benefit from the place of us giving because we're giving from that place of fullness.
Hello,
right?
Vanessa. This is Joe from NRC. You do have a question. Denisha asks, with our clients going through so much, why take care of ourselves?
Oh, great question, Denisha. Thank you. So, and I was answering that in a little bit, but I want to be more specific to that because with our clients going through so much, if we show up from a place of depletion and exhaustion, overwhelm, and then they're actually going to biologically, physiologically pick that up and carry even more of what we're carrying out of the room. So there's a theory called the polyvagal theory, and I don't think I'm going into it on this slide because it's from neurobiology of trauma more specifically, but I'll take a second to discuss it here. But when we have our nervous system is balanced and at ease and open, and our nervous system is really engaged and healthy, then those around us, their nervous system will actually match or meet our own. And so we become a healing presence in the world. And so when we aren't taking good care of ourselves, then we're not as healing a presence in the world as we'd like to be. And it can actually make it more difficult for our clients to heal and to have their own experience of wellness. So one of the ways that we can take care of ourselves is to really think about that that our good self-care can be a great model, kind of just from that perspective, but it also allows for us to bring more gentleness and more well-being into the world biologically. So I hope that answers your question. And I just think it's a really good question. I think that was the question that started me on my path was, does this really matter? Will it help me be a better service to the people that I'm working with? So some of the things that come up around barriers when I talk to advocates across the country around this is that that one of the biggest barriers is that feeling of hopelessness and helplessness. It's that feeling of, why do I need to do this, or it doesn't really matter. And so just, that feeling can be, I'm just kind of laughing at the way feeling is spelled on my slide, so I'm going to not get too distracted with that. But it is that sense of hopelessness and helplessness. And also the inability to embrace complexity can really be a barrier to self-care, just that idea that we have to do it perfectly, right? That self-care has to be one more thing. When I talk about self-care, we're not talking about bubble baths and massages. Self-care can just be a glass of water when you're thirsty. It can be a kind word when you're weary, just telling yourself, I've got this. It can be just looking up at the sky and realizing that, we're part of something larger than ourselves, whatever that might look like. But, just that inability to embrace the complexity of self-care, we've boiled it down to these little quick fixes, and when they don't work, we feel hopeless. But the reality is self-care is as individual as you are, and what care means to you is going to be very different than what care means to me. And we're going to jump into the specifics of that in a bit. But these are just some of those barriers. One of the first things that I did when I was just starting out with this journey is I found a self-care ally, someone that inspired me, that I admired, that I felt like, who can I look to feel like this matters and that this is going to be useful? And I picked Audrey Lord. I don't know how many people have heard of her, but she was a poet and an artist. She was an activist. She was just this amazing queer advocate in the world. And just, she was facing, what I loved about Audrey is that she was facing a world that gave her no right to be, right? She was a queer black woman at a time when being a queer black woman was not welcomed in the world in a vigorous or good or meaningful way. And Audrey, even in the face of that, knew that it was important to take care of herself. So she really became my self-care ally because of that, because she was doing it at a time that was very complicated. So I have two quotes from her that I just had to share because they've become really important to me. One is, caring for myself is not indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. This idea that self-care is actually part of the revolution that we're going to make in the world. That was a call to action for me because I realized that as a black woman, preserving myself well was an act of rebellion and revolution. So I put that to all of you, too, to just think about that idea. And another one of her quotes that I loved is, you have to learn to love yourself before you can love me or accept my loving, which is just this idea that when we are loving ourselves, we're more able to bring love and wellness into the outer world. So I invite you again to think about who your self-care ally might be. It can be a teacher you once had who really inspired you, or it can be, a character in a book that you felt was very inspiring, or a poet or a writer. But it helps to have this ally that you don't have to speak to them about it, but they become this kind of person who can inspire you along the way and answer for you the why am I doing this? So if folks have any self-care allies they want to call out, this is a great time to do that.
Vicki, I'm sorry. Vicki posted a question, It says, how much of an obligation do organizations have to support advocates in being well? We can talk about self-care, but what if the employer is not on board? What then?
Oh, good one. Yes. I think that organizations have a enormous obligation to the self-care of their, to making space for and creating practices that will lead toward healthy advocates as well as healthy executive directors and managers. I think that responsibility goes from the board all the way through to volunteers. I'm going to talk about some organizational practices that can support that belief, but I think that self-care, I think in the absence of an organization that can support you in your self-care, you still can find a way to take care of yourself, and I think it's important. But if you think about what Bonnie said around that we are wounded and we heal in community, it's a very real thing that an organization that doesn't support the self-care of its employees does create an environment where self-care cannot thrive in the way that it needs to. So I think that it's a very important obligation, and it's something that I teach when I'm teaching board management and when I'm doing manager or executive director training. It's something that I teach throughout the trainings that I do, because I do feel like it's a very important responsibility, and I just feel like without it, we won't get to the level of self-care that we actually need to as a field. So I hope that answers your question. We're going to talk about some of the individual strategies before we go into the organizational strategies. We're going to start with the individual ones. And these are from the Neurobiology of Trauma program at Portland State University. These are the strategies that the research is telling us are the most effective. So I don't want you to think that these are the only things that are going to be effective, but these are some of the things that we have actually found to be most effective in helping your nervous system and leading to a sense of wellness in your life. So I'm just going to take each one. So the belly breathing is one that is really helpful, and I'm going to walk you through a little bit of it. So those of you who can participate in this, do so. Those of you who can't, don't, no worries. But I'm just going to walk you through it so you can have an opportunity to have the experience. So I want to start with just inviting you to put your feet on the floor, rest your arms to your sides. If you're sitting in a chair, put them a little bit behind you on the chair, but rest your shoulders, put your feet on the floor, kind of soften your gaze. You're not going to need to look at your screen for now. I'm going to tell you when it's time to look at it again. And I just want you to invite yourself to notice your breath, to just kind of notice your breath, where it is in your body. Just notice the rhythm of your breath as it's moving through your body. You don't have to change it. It doesn't have to get deeper. It doesn't have to do anything. Just kind of notice it, welcome it. Relax your shoulders, your jaw. Kind of feel the seat if you're sitting on a chair. And just bring yourself to a sense of gratitude that you are here in this moment with all of us breathing. You've been breathing since the day you were born. Your breath will be with you always. And so that's just a quick, very quick experience of breathing. And what happens when you put your feet on the floor and you put your arms behind you on your chair is that you're automatically going to lift your chest a little bit, and your breath will gently and just automatically settle in your belly. So a lot of times with belly breathing, people feel like, oh, it's very difficult, like they have to concentrate on it. So this is a way of circumventing that anything that you have to do. So you can teach this to clients. You can do it for yourself. It is one of the number one things that we can do to alleviate stress is belly breathing. And so meditation is something that people practice quite a bit, and meditation is very helpful. But belly breathing is actually going to be more helpful in settling your central nervous system. That belly breathing, allowing your body to release the serotonin. 90% of the serotonin in the body is in the belly. And so when we're belly breathing, we're kind of allowing that serotonin to begin to circulate. Our stomach presses on our vagus nerve when I talked about the polyvagal theory and its impact on our brains and our well-being. So this belly breathing can really be a quick and very effective way of bringing yourself back to a sense of wellness. So I offer that as our first practice, our first principle. And if you have any questions about the techniques, just interrupt. You all know that'll be good. We'll answer them as we're going along. So the other, let me see, I see someone doing the exercise. Oh, yeah. Carrie has written, I'm going to pop back to the belly breathing just to respond to that, but that one of the things that can happen with our belly breathing and one of the things that makes it so wonderful is that we start to give ourselves permission to notice what's happening in our emotional well-being. So that the kind of chatter that might be under the surface will just move through us. So it's a wonderful way of relaxing and allowing your body to catch up and to give you all those signals of what's happening. Yeah. It is a good thing, and practicing it for longer can be very helpful. Like we did it for less than 2 minutes because we're on a webinar, and I doubt they would have appreciated me taking copious amounts of time to do belly breathing. But you can do it for 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes at night, and I have heard from survivors of intense trauma and physical abuse that this has been life-changing for them. So I definitely have experience with this being a really effective technique to give time to. So the other technique seems just obvious, but actually when people are under stress, they don't allow themselves to do the things that give them the most pleasure. So doing pleasant activities has been proven through research to be a really effective way of building resiliency. And so a pleasant activity is going to be different for everyone, but for me, a pleasant activity that I'm really looking forward to is going hiking at Mount St. Helens in a couple of weeks with my sister for her birthday. And we have that on the calendar written down. I know what day I'm going to do it. I'm very much looking forward to it. Another pleasant activity that I'm looking forward to is that I'm going to San Francisco to meet with my mother-in-law, and we're going to be going out to dinner in one of her favorite restaurants. And so, because I don't see her very often, she lives in San Francisco. So just putting on your calendar, in your life, the things that actually bring you joy. So I challenge you, my homework for you to do is to sometime today, if you can, I want you to just make a list of 10 things, simple things. They can be really simple things like getting great gel pens to use in your journal, or cooking your favorite beef stew that your grandmother used to make, or watching a Still Magnolia's movie or something. These are just things that popped into my head. But coming up with 10 things that you really would love to do, just enjoyable things, and I want you to just make your list. I want you to number the paper 1 to 10, so push yourself a little bit to come up with 10 of them, and then take your calendar and put those 10 things on the calendar over the next year so that you have them on there. That will be your homework. And just really stretching yourself to add these pleasant activities. What this does is it allows you to have perspective. It broadens your perspective and your awareness and allows you to think more broadly about yourself. You're not just an advocate doing this work, but you're an advocate doing this work who also enjoys certain things and has a lot of fun with them, right? So making this list of 10 things, it's just a wonderful practice. The other thing to think about, so there is some qualifiers for these 10 things, is you want them to be simple, realistic, and achievable. You don't want them to be one more thing that you sell yourself on, right? You want to pick things that really bring your energy up. They really are joyful. But there's something you know you can do and that you can achieve, right? And you want to select a date and a time to do them, right? And go ahead and put them on that calendar. Have a backup time to set up the pleasant activity if it doesn't get completed. Let's say that you plan to go, I plan to go hiking with my sister, and she calls and says, you know, I hurt my ankle, I can't go hiking, we're not going to be able to do that. Then I need to be able to have a backup time to do it or have another thing that I get to do, but you do want to not have that disappointment there. Yeah, I see some folks are putting their 10 things on here. Jolene writes, reading a good book, going to see live music, walking through nature, exactly some of the things that folks like. You know, I really enjoy sometimes I just started reading Moby Dick again, and because I like big, thick, dense books that have nothing to do with the work that I'm doing, and so sitting by my fire and reading that book is just one of my small, pleasant activities that I get a lot of joy of. And also, you know, don't underestimate the joy of just your environment, having a beautiful wrap that you like to wear in the evenings after work that is warm and comfortable, or a favorite pair of slippers, or a favorite cup. You know, these pleasant activities can be really small things. The key is that they make you smile, they bring joy to your heart, they make you feel good, and that you're generating them. They're not dependent on somebody else to set up for you, right? A banana split. I like that, Megan. That's a great one. And dancing. See, these are wonderful. So remember, your homework is to create your list of 10 and get them on a calendar. So we all have heard so much information about healthy eating, and there is, you know, I heard from a friend of mine at my yoga class the other day that she's afraid to even eat at this point because she doesn't know whether she's supposed to be a vegan or a paleo, fat or no fat. You know, there's just too much information out there around what is healthy eating. What the research tells us around, when I think about this in terms of self-care, isn't what you're eating, it's how you're eating. So when we think about healthy eating habits, it's not about me saying, like, you're supposed to eat all protein or no protein or all fat or no fat. It's really about how do you approach food and how do you approach nourishment and what is nourishing for your body at this time in your life. You know, are there health conditions that require you to eat a certain way so that you can feel more thriving in your life? So, you know, it's really about how do you attend to the nourishment needs of your own body. So really identifying the way that you're eating and how the way you're eating is affecting your well-being. You know, are you going all day with no food because you're so busy, which is an under-eating pattern, and then you get home and you're eating everything in sight because you're so hungry and so starved for nourishment. You know, hunger can be for food, but it can also be for nourishment, that sense of well-being, right? So looking at your own patterns, asking yourself, about caffeine and sugar and salt and, the foods that are in your life, how are they sustaining and supporting your life? And then coming up with a way of eating that really makes sense to you and supports your well-being. And that's going to look different for all of us. So I give you permission and invite you to just think intentionally about how food sustains your well-being and how your eating habits support you being the best, healthiest advocate you can be. And so that's what I mean about healthy eating. And the research is really solid on this, is that, food absolutely gives our bodies the nourishment that they need to thrive. And so what we eat matters, right? So are there any questions so far? I'm looking. Doesn't look like it. So again, this is another one that there's been a ton of research out there about. Exercise is so important. What we know is that if there was a pill that did what exercise does, everyone would just love it and be taking it. And so exercise is one of those things that is so good for the body and so important for self-care that we really encourage everyone to do it. What's interesting, though, is that I don't think of exercise in the same way that people do, like 30 minutes on the bike or whatever. Exercise is really about joyful movement and moving your body in a way that feels good. So I just invite you right now, as we're sitting here, to just check in with yourself and ask yourself, how does my body want to move right now? We've been sitting for almost an hour. So we're getting toward the end here. We've been sitting for a long time. What does your body feel like doing? How does your body want to move? Do you feel like stretching your arms? Or do you feel like standing up? Or do you feel like, doing a yoga, putting the speaker on and doing a little bit of yoga posturing? Or I hear from Drew that shoulder and back stretch. And so this check-in and saying, how do I want to move? What would feel good to me? Because this is about that self-care. And sometimes I'm really in the mood to ride my bike. Sometimes that's exactly what my body needs. Other times I want to go play in the water. But I do try to move my body and check in with my body on a regular basis because we know that movement is important. Our bodies were not designed to sit at desks for long periods of time, and particularly when we're dealing with trauma, right? So movement helps us cope with trauma. Yes, I see Susan is talking about here having rheumatoid arthritis, and, that movement can be really tough when you have that condition because there's a lot of pain involved. Absolutely. I hear that. And I see that there's a question here, what kind of exercise is good to deal with trauma? And there actually is research that says that the best exercise for trauma is the exercise that gets your heart rate up. Because there's just something about getting the blood pumping and doing that is helpful. And I find that for me, what's helpful is being outside and walking. So I do just invite you to think about the kinds of exercise that will support you. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of these practices being rooted in who you are and what you need. This isn't about more information. This is really about questioning yourself, how do I want to eat? How do I need to eat to sustain my well-being? How do I need to move to be joyful and happy and whole? This is really about connecting with your desires. But also I find that when I've worked with hundreds of trauma survivors, and we really always start with asking your body every day how it wants to move. And sometimes your body will just really not feel like doing something vigorous and heart-pounding. And I have found that that's okay. I mean, that's my own personal practice with people, that if you don't feel like getting your heart pumping, that it's okay to do something more simple that feels good to you, and that we just keep building on that. And there's a really fun exercise that one of my clients thought of that I just thought was fascinating. She puts on her favorite song every day and dances any way she wants. And she just blasts her favorite song, and that is her whole exercise. She's been doing it for about 7 months now, and she loves it. So managing procrastination, this is a very important practice because procrastination is draining, right? It starts to create a lot of self-doubt, and it can be depressing and draining. And so one of the important practices is really trying to practice prioritizing what you really want to do and letting go of those things you don't want to do, or setting up a time frame to do some of those difficult things that you don't want to do but you know you have to do, or those priorities that show up that they're not your own priorities but you just really kind of have to deal with them. And what we know is that procrastination can make those things so draining that you actually lose momentum in being able to accomplish them. And so a lot of times people think that motivation, that you have to wait till you feel like doing something in order to do it. But what the research tells us is that action creates motivation, not the other way around. So coming up with some kind of tool or system for managing your own procrastination is very helpful. And the first step in that is making a list or having a conversation with a loved one, or somehow getting clear about where do I procrastinate in my life? Where are the areas that are really hard for me? What have I been meaning to do for 6 months or longer that I haven't done? So the first step is really getting clear about where procrastination is showing up, and then asking yourself, what are the things on this list of where it's showing up that I can actually just let go of and never have to think about again? Maybe I'm never going to clean out that garage. That's okay. Or maybe it really needs to be cleaned out, so I'm just going to hire someone to do it, or I'm going to create a work party with my friends and family. But somehow finding a way to not let procrastination become this corrosive drain on your well-being, because it actually can be really draining and depressing. So I invite you to think about that. And if anyone has great procrastination systems, I'm sure we'd love to hear about them.
There is a question/comment from someone. It says, how can one deal with constant interruptions? I don't often procrastinate. Things just get pushed back because of the constant interruptions.
Awesome question. So there's a couple of tools. So this, I'll tell you how I deal with it, because as the executive director, it can be unbelievably difficult to deal with these constant interruptions because there's so many balls in the air. And so I actually carve out time to away from any possible interruption in order to tend to some of the things that I know are getting more difficult. And one tool I've been using is I have on my Gmail, my email is always open, and there's a task list thing, little clicky thing that you can, and so when someone interrupts, I just will jot down what they, instead of dealing with the interruption, I'll just jot it down there. And at some point in the week, I'll go back to those and deal with them. But that's my system. I think it's very difficult to deal with interruptions. People have different tools. It depends a lot on your nature and your role in your organization. Some people just close their door. I find that I'm not a door closer, so that doesn't work well for me. But letting people kind of come in and just saying, well, I'm going to jot that down, kind of making lists, works for me. So I think that interruptions, especially in this day and age where we talked earlier about the complexity of our environment, they're just difficult. And I agree with you that it's not so much procrastination anymore. It's really about how do I even get to stick to my priorities. And for me, it's carving out time to do that. I literally will take Monday Monday mornings and Friday afternoons to wrap up so that I'm not heading into the week with a lot of old stuff or heading into my weekend with a lot of old stuff. So that little practice helps me. One of the survivors I work with, she does at the end of every day, she makes a list of all the things that she didn't get to tend to, and then she just burns it and starts the next day over. So it's different things for different people. So social network, this idea that we are social creatures, that it is so we cannot heal. I cannot stress this enough. We cannot heal in isolation. We know our self-care has to have two elements. There's what we do for our private, kind of quiet, joyful self, but also how we show up in community and where we get nourished from other, how we get nourishment from the people who love us and whom we trust the most. And so that social networking is so important, and I have found in my years as an advocate that isolation can really draw me in sometimes because I'm dealing with so many people all the time. And I'm dealing with so much trauma and so much, the darkness that we have to hear every day of people who are harmed. And sometimes I just have that draw toward isolation. And so I think that remembering that part of our self-care is being in community in a good and meaningful way and creating meaningful, good communities to be part of is a really important practice. And so if you look on the slide, it says not too loose, not too dense. And this is really thinking about who are the people, the 5 people or the 3 people that you could go to talk about spiritual things, spiritual matters, big picture conversations. Who are the people that you go to if you're having trouble at work or a challenge, or even that you're thinking about a career change and you wanted to talk that through with someone? Who would you go to if you were depressed and suffering and you had trauma and you wanted to talk about that pain? This is really about having different people in your life to support all the different roles that you carry and ways that you move in the world. Because what happens is sometimes we have 1 or 2 people who we're expecting to be all things to all people, and it can burn people out, and we can feel really betrayed and isolated. So having a social network, that idea that your social system is a system, not a person, is an important practice in self-care. So I offer that, and if you have questions about that, let me know. It's really an invitation to think about who are the people that you have in your life who can address and support you in all the different ways that you live in your life. And don't worry if it's one person. That's a start. It says here a red flag is under 5 people. That's what the research says. But that's just a start. And so just starting to develop other friendships and other people that can support you in having a really joyful experience. So sleep hygiene is important. There's a couple of things I want to point out here around sleep. One is that we know that when we're not sleeping, that ups our vulnerability to diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, cancer, and other things. And so realizing that sleep is our body's opportunity to boost its immune response and to begin the healing process. So sleep is huge. And so people need different levels of sleep. Some people need 10 hours. Some people need 8 hours. Some people need 7 hours. There's research that says nobody is getting restorative sleep if they're sleeping under 7 hours. But it's important to just think about how are you sleeping, you know. And the other thing around sleep is that darkness supports good sleep. So if you have a habit of sleeping with the television on, which a lot of survivors do because of the hypervigilance and just needing that noise, I suggest folks switch to a sound machine and turn the TV off so that they still get that background noise, but they're not getting the light, because you really do want darkness for sleep. It's a pretty important part. And if you notice that after a good night's sleep, your ability to solve other problems will be intensified. So you'll actually be more effective in the work that you do from getting good sleep. Awesome. So if there's no questions about, those are the self-care practices. I know I went through them rather quickly, but I'm wanting to make sure we get through everything. Any questions about them before I move to organizational strategies? Yes.
There was one more question. It says, is sleeping with music on still healthy?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think that I've worked with hundreds of survivors who really cannot sleep in a room with no sound. And so it's important, having music or a sound machine. You might want to put a timer so that it goes off about 2 hours into your rest, just so that it can interrupt dreams and things like that. But what really disrupts sleep is light, because of the way we evolved as a species. We evolved to sleep in darkness, and so the light disrupts our sleep pretty significantly. And so you can Google that to find more research on it. But yeah, it's really you want to have some darkness so you sleep well. So organizational strategies, and I'm going to give some resources at the end, but these are some things that organizations can do that will really support self-care. And, the thing to remember is that organizations, and thank you for whoever asked the question earlier, organizations have a responsibility to create trauma-informed organizations, and that includes self-care for advocates and volunteers. So it's not like a thing that people should be thinking about on the side. It should be baked into the entire system, right? The entire system. So the first self-care strategy we have here is having regular ongoing meetings with supervisors and coworkers and volunteers and boards of directors to talk about self-care strategies and how they're working or not working in the organization. These should be regular and ongoing. They shouldn't be like only at a strategic planning session or a staff retreat we're going to talk about it. It should absolutely be part of everything that's happening in the organization. And carving out the time for it models for staff and volunteers and boards how important it really is. So leadership should schedule those meetings, show up for those meetings, facilitate, make sure they're ongoing. But that should be part of it. It's a powerful strategy that says this matters, because what we spend money and time on, we validate, right? Policies and practices that support self-care should be in place. One of those might be, and I think we have a list here, but PTO, personal time off, so that people can use their sick time as self-care time instead of having to be sick or ill. Making sure that people can take the holidays that are important to them, or spend time, take time off to go spend time with their children or to visit, watch football games, but just really putting in place the time off that people need. Also, policies can be kind of grievance policies, or just different ways that we talk about how do we deal with trauma or stress that is part of this organization. So policies can definitely not just be about PTO. They can be about how do we handle stressors. And you can have policies that guide you through the process of how you handle stress when it shows up. If you're running a shelter, the policy might be around debrief time. I know that one of the shelters here in Portland, when somebody, they have every other Friday, they close the office at noon, and people can just, use that time to catch up on files, or they can go home early. But it's built into the policy structure that they have that time, and board and management staff cover those phone lines during that closure so that the shelter staff can take that time. So those policies can be PTO, but they can be more in-depth policies as well. And those are specific to the organization, of course. A clear agency mission statement is an important self-care strategy, and self-care and support of advocates should be part of the mission statement. We talk a lot about how we care for others, but would it be appropriate to add how we care for ourselves in our mission statements or in our value statements? It's important to have practices to address microaggressions. As a person of color, I know that it's never going to be an organization that is safe to me if they haven't outlined something to deal with microaggression, and that I need to know that there's a process in place and that there's ways that I can navigate those, because they will show up and do show up. How are staff conflicts addressed? These are some of the things where those stressors show up, and you want clear policies for how they're going to be addressed. Schedule staff retreats. This is so important. Just doing fun things that relieve stress. Because self-care, most of your self-care is going to happen outside of the office, but going into an office that's supportive and has wellness practices and policies just makes it that much easier. We want to normalize safe environments for having conversations around what's not working and where our challenges are, as well as what's working and where our creativity lands. So one of the ways that we do this here at the Coalition is we start our conversations either at staff meetings and those things, those check-ins of, how are you doing? What's going on for you in your life? Where are you struggling? What do you have to celebrate? And so we start our staff meetings with that kind of personal check-in that allows people to show up as their full self. I think we've all been in these meetings where we have to show up and there are awkward silences, and you can't really show up as your full self. It's not a safe place to talk about what you're struggling with or what you want to celebrate. And we've tried to normalize that at the Coalition here. The other thing is to make sure that folks who are frontline staff also have job duties that are not trauma-related. And I think we have done a good job in our field of making sure that that doesn't happen, but we don't want the advocate who is working with survivors to have to do that his entire 40 hours. There should be other duties that pull them away from that, where other tasks can be done, because we know that that's a recipe for trauma, for vicarious trauma, is to be the only person doing that work and not having duties away from that work. Also having employee assistance plans, counseling, having a self-care cohort, which is one of the things here in Portland. One of our organizations actually has a self-care team whose job is 4 times a year to pull together self-care stuff. But what has also happened with the self-care team is they are the person that people go to a lot and say, wow, I just had a really hard time, or I am struggling to sleep. And so those teams have become kind of allies, self-care allies in the organization. So these are just some of the ways that organizations can help. The important thing here for organizations to really remember and is that self-care has to be embedded in the organization in a meaningful way that is well supported by policy, practice, funding, leadership. It cannot be a side thing if it's going to have a good impact. So we are at the part about creating your plan, and I've given you lots of homework, from belly breathing to making your list of self-care things or pleasant activities, to checking in with your body on how you're going to move or how your body wants to move, to thinking deeply about who can support you in your life, and thinking about what kinds of foods are nourishing. Like, I've given you lots of different things to be thinking about. So how do you not walk away from this webinar, and let this just be one more thing that you did this week? You know, how do we make this meaningful for you? How do you let this launch your self-care practice? How do you move it from listening to a webinar to something that you actually get to a year from now say, wow, look at what an impact this experience has had on me and what I've learned about myself through that, right? So the way that we do that is to create a plan. We make a commitment to ourselves. We decide for ourselves how we are going to assign meaning to these practices and how we're going to use them. So one of the things is to be specific about what you're going to do. Like I gave you really specific pieces, and maybe those are the things you do, and maybe they're not. And it's absolutely fine. Maybe the only thing you're going to do is, you know, go talk to your boss about the organizational practices, right, and how you want to get those implemented. And that would be awesome. It'd be wonderful. So creating the plan is really about creating your plan. So the task is to just figure it out. You know, what am I going to do? You know, where are my strengths and challenges in doing it? What am I going to need? You know, kind of get clear about, wow, I'm really prepared to do this because I have this going on. But here's some of the barriers that I might have going on. Consider your capacity. You know, maybe right now your plate is so full that you really, you know, I want to get to this plan thing, but I can't do it right now, so maybe I'm just going to get a good night's sleep. You know, consider who your support people are and what your resources are. You know, who can really support me in this? Who are my allies? Maybe you have several people from your organization on the call and you get together at the end of the week and just talk about, you know, what can we do? How do we take care of ourselves? How do we take care of each other? And remember that with any plan, it's really important to review it and see what's working or not working and revise it as you need to. This is a support for you. And to be gentle and curious with yourself, you know, but gentle and curiosity and openness doesn't mean that you're not consistent and that you don't show up. You're so important. And so any commitment or agreement you make to yourself, you want to honor, you know, however big or small it is. And if you can't honor it, be gentle and circle back and say, wow, I just wasn't able to do that. But I'm, you know, what am I going to do next? So that's kind of the creating your plan piece. And I just invite you to do that and create a plan either with others or on your own. But it can be incredibly helpful to do. So let's talk a little bit about resources. Any more questions, because I'm about to wrap up? Any questions about creating the plan? Nope. Okay. If there are some, well, let me know. So you're going to get these resources in the follow-up email, so I'm just going to talk about them now so you know exactly what you're getting. So the first one, Move to End Violence, has a 21-day self-care challenge that can be really fun. And what I like about it and what's fun about it is that every day for 21 days, you'll get a little email prompt that reminds you to do something around self-care. And they're fun things like remember to drink water or go out with a friend or make a connection or read a book. But they're really fun ideas that I just really enjoyed it. I've done it twice, so I wanted to include it here. So you'll get a link to that. You can go in. You can start it. It starts at the beginning of each month, but you can go in and register, and then when it starts, you'll get your first email, and you'll be off and running from there. Another Move to End Violence resource that I love, and I use it as a journaling tool with the new executive directors that I work with here in Oregon. But it's called Finding Your Purpose, Tools for Transformational Leadership. And what it has is like 30-some-odd questions for self-exploration around leadership and around advocacy and Move to End Violence work. And so what I have done is we will take one or two of those questions and work on it for a couple of weeks in our journal, and then we come back together and discuss it. And so that's one way we use it, but it's a very good tool for self-exploration. And good self-care is being able to assign meaning and purpose to your work. UCLA Mindfulness Awareness Resource Center has excellent free meditations. They have 2-minute, 3-minute, 5-minute meditations. This is a world of resources around mindfulness and breath work. Almost all of them are free. It's amazing. Living Well website, Dr. Lissick, this is neurobiology, all the information I gave you around neurobiology. You can find a lot of resources there. And then we're sending you an anti-racist organizational practices document for organizational anti-racism work, which I think is trauma-informed self-care as well. So that is it. And I hope this was really helpful for you all. I wonder if you have any more questions. I know that was quick, but I hope it was useful.
Vanessa, that was fabulous. That was awesome. That was excellent information. And I must say that I've been using your suggestion around darkness supports good sleep. I've been using it since I participated in another training you did, and it is phenomenal. It is the truth. I am one of your examples that it works.
Thank you.
Yes, and I've been advocating that with anyone I come in contact with. So, again, thank you so much for the information. I have my homework. I'm committed to doing a few of the things that you mentioned on the webinar. So I'll schedule my list of 10 things, and I hope everyone else does as well. Belly breathing, I'm on it. I'm ready to do that as well. So I got some more aha moments every time I participate in your training. I do. So I'm sure that this was invaluable for our attendees as well. Thank you all so much for taking the first step in committing to prioritizing self-care. And if we can be of any assistance to you with developing your own plan or moving forward your organizational strategies, please, 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 get in touch with us. Our information will be available, and Yvonne also put her information in the chat box. So, again, thank you all for joining us. Vanessa, thank you so much for a well-informed and comprehensive approach during this very short time on how we can best take care of ourselves while we attend to the needs of all our survivors that we serve.
Thank you. You guys have a wonderful rest of your day and take good care.
Thank you, everyone.